Hi everybody, and thank you for coming out today on this beautiful October day. So as you know, October is National So in October, the National Arts and Literature Month, it is to help and encourage the exploration of new facets of the arts and humanities. So we thought this would be a good time to unveil the marker dedicated to these three ladies of Fisher's Hill. And one of our, if you notice, there's an empty chair up here. One of our researchers, Gloria Stickley, passed away on September 2nd. She was a researcher and editor of the local, she was a researcher and local coordinator, retired educator of the Shenandoah County Public Schools, and graduate of Strasburg High School, Lord Fairfax, and Shepherd University. She was the former president of the Strasburg Museum and had a lifelong dedication to local history. She always had an excitement and enthusiasm for this effort, and very much wanted us to have these three ladies remembered. Dennis Hupp said of her, he is the Strasburg Museum president, Gloria had a beautiful, wonderful smile every time you would run into her, and she always made you feel welcome. For Gloria, we'll have a moment of silence. And next, I would like to introduce to you Ms. Cheryl Lyon. She is our lead researcher. She studied at Wheaton College and Eastern Mennonite University. She's a Fisher's Hill resident, and she rediscovered the lost history of these three ladies. She herself is an artist, author, and historian, and restored the 1822 Silver Lake Mill in Dayton, Virginia. Cheryl Lyon?
About 130 to 140 years ago, on a Sunday afternoon like we have today, probably Bertha von Hillern and Maria Beckett would be arriving home at the Barb House near the back road next to North Mountain, just a mile or two west of the little village of Fisher's Hill. They would have walked 11 miles to get to church, either in Front Royal or Woodstock, where it would have been held in a home if it was at Woodstock, and they walked 11 miles home. Can you imagine walking 11 miles one way to church? When they got home to the Barb House, probably around this time of day, if it had been an early service, there were likely people waiting on the porches there at the Barb House. The women were known for treating local area people with medical problems because they knew medications. Maria had a father where she grew up in Portland, Maine, who was an apothecary, and he had an apothecary shop, so she knew medications very well. One of the stories told about them that we know very well is how many they kept medications in jars and bottles all over the mantles of the second floor at the Barb House on the west side of the house. We have articles that tell us exactly what their lives were about. That's just one of the stories of probably a few hundred, and hopefully some of you have kept up with Neil Thorne's Facebook page, where he's posting a new story about one of the women, or more than one of the women, each week. There are some great stories to be told. And interestingly to me, in the divisive times that we live in, the story of these ladies is a story that brings us together. It brought the ladies themselves together, and it brought the four of us together who made up the Fisher's Hill Project. And now this same story brings all of us here today. And I think that's an accomplishment, especially 130 or 40 years later. It's a happy day for us in the Fisher's Hill Ladies Project. It's an element of sadness that's already been mentioned. It She was the gracious one of us, far more so than the other three of us, and she probably would have welcomed each of you individually and thanked you for coming today. And I'd like to note, for those who don't know it, that Gloria actually helped us plan this event and was very much part of the planning until she became notably ill. Almost everyone here today is interested in history. And as Neil pointed out, this was a story that was totally accidental. I had nothing in mind about doing anything other than researching the Fisher's Hill picnic grounds and some aspects of the train trestle at Fisher's Hill. And in reading some newspaper microfilm, I ran across 2 or 3 sentences that made a comment about Bertha von Hillern's studio at Fisher's Hill. A studio at Fisher's Hill? Many of you have been to Fisher's Hill and will understand why that gave me great pause. So I started taking that little thread and started trying to Google Bertha von Hillern, and nothing was making sense. But slowly but surely, it was like a little tiny piece of thread that I got hold of that day, and you just give it a tug, and it just, a little bit more comes, and then a little bit more comes, and a little more, and still more. And one of the things that was a huge help, I'm not sure he's here today, we couldn't find anybody locally who'd ever heard of these 3 women. And finally, somebody suggested I talk to Daniel Bly. And Daniel Bly had grown up in the area that we were fairly sure these ladies lived, west of Fisher's Hill. And Daniel came to visit me in Dayton, where I live. And he didn't know anything about the 3 ladies, but the one little tidbit he knew was that his mother had told him and his brother that there were valuable paintings in the Barb House. And so that was the hint that we needed. And from there, shall we say, the rest is history. But fortunately, Ann Foster and her family have been so gracious in permitting access to the house. She, in fact, had 2 paintings that turned out to be the confirmation that we were needing. They were paintings by Bertha von Hillern that were signed by her. In fact, the one I think is on your far left over there. It's actually a picture from the rear of the home, the Barb House, and we think she may have given it to the family that owned the farm at that time as a thank you gift for the years that they spent there. But those paintings had been passed down through the owners of the farm, and the people were aware that there was some connection with those paintings on the farm, but they did not know what the connection was. So we were able to find all of that story. Those were the first 2 paintings that were found that were known to be by Bertha von Hillern that were public. We found another one at the Virginia Museum of History and Culture in Richmond, and we have found several more in private hands. So we now have roughly 6 to 8 paintings by Bertha. Everything that happens seems to just expand this story greatly. And Maria Beckett believed that she had a 6th sense. And I've had to do some research on exactly what that means. And I think she was very sincere in thinking that. I have never grown up believing in that too much. But I have to say, the last few months of working on the book, information just keeps cascading out of nowhere about these ladies, and I've had this happen in working on genealogy projects in the past, but it's far more this time. There was one incident where I was looking for something in a newspaper, and another year of newspaper popped up, 1904, the Washington Times. On the front page, I wasn't even looking for this, on the front page is the headline, Miles O'Connor gives art collection to the Trinity College for Women in Washington, D.C. I grew up in Washington, D.C. I'm not familiar with Trinity College for Women, read the article. This man gave 500 paintings to Trinity College, and the ones that were called out were 2 by Bertha von Hillern and 1 by Maria Beckett. And Hope Grimm, who's part of our committee, and I think most of you know, she took it on herself to look for these paintings, discovered the college still existed. It's now Trinity Washington University in Washington, D.C. It's affiliated with Catholic University. And she was in touch with Sister Mary, the archivist there. And in about a week, Sister Mary came back and confirmed that, in fact, the 3 paintings were still hanging on the wall at Trinity Washington University. And so that has been an unfolding that was totally accidental. One of those paintings, the one by Maria Beckett, is a most unusual painting and is unlike anything that I'm familiar with that she's ever done. Yesterday, in preparing for this, Chris Volpe, I have not met before, and I'm taking advantage of him being here by making a list of questions to ask him. And while I was working on that, I looked at an article I've had for several years. At the very end of the article, irrelevant to the article, were about 2 sentences that I feel certain address this unusual painting at Trinity Washington University. He and I will get to talk about that later. But how circumstantial is that? It's been an unfolding process for all of us. Finding more paintings has been our primary goal. And there have been disappointments, many disappointments along the way. In fact, the Paulist fathers in New York City with the Catholic Church likely do not want to ever hear from Pope Grimm again. If anybody, if you know, I think a lot of you do know Pope Grimm, she's very persistent in anything she does. That's one of her characteristics. She's very good at what she does. And she was on the phone with their archivist every day or 2 days or 3 days saying, have you thought about this or have you thought about that? Because they supposedly received 225 paintings from Maria or from her estate. And Hope was determined to find those paintings. Unfortunately, they were not uncovered. We're not sure what happened to them. Maybe they're still out there to be found. We hope so. But one of the fascinating things to all of us has been the places that these 3 women went, the hotels they stayed in, the food they ate, the newspaper articles written about them from coast to coast, from New York City and Boston and Miami all the way to Los Angeles and Seattle and any place else in California you can think of. And yet within a few short decades, they were forgotten. And they lived, in the 1880s, they were living mostly at Fisher's Hill for that decade, a big part of that decade. And they were shipping their paintings, shipping their stories, shipping their, whatever they were doing. They were coming to the trains here in Strasburg and Strasburg Junction and shipping their wares out to exhibitions. I have asked myself many times over what are the important takeaways about these ladies. Maria had a painting that was exhibited in the rotunda of the Women's Building at the 1893 Columbian Exposition. She considered that painting her greatest work. It was called The Storm. And unfortunately, that painting has been lost to time. And so far, we have not found it. I just finished reviewing 160 books about the exposition in 1893, and despite all the photographs, we can almost find a picture of just within a few feet of where her painting was probably hanging. But so far, we have not been able to find what an image of that painting would have been like. In Bertha's case, she was a German immigrant, knew no English. She came to America about 1874, 1875, around the age of 17. And by the age of 21, just 4 years later, she's writing articles in English, and she's become the national champion pedestrian, which is a fast walker. It was a sport that was very popular back then. And she did it so Emmma Howard Wight, the writer, was keeping up with the technology of the times. She was writing photoplays and storyettes. She worked with companies that eventually became Paramount Pictures. And these three ladies walked among us here on these streets. I just think that is absolutely fascinating. And they accomplished these things against all odds, against very difficult barriers that were put in front of them. And they pursued them with boundless passion. And I think that shines through in everything that I have learned about them. And so one thing in closing that I wanted to read is what we used on the invitation to this event. It was a verse that goes something like this: what once was known is forgotten again, lost in time, sometimes for centuries, only to be rediscovered later. And so I appreciate, all of us appreciate you being here to help rediscover this bit of history that had been forgotten locally. And hopefully we can remember for a long time, especially with this marker going up. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl. And next, I'd like to invite Mayor Brandy Hawkins-Bowes to give a few words for this project. She's a 1999 graduate of Strasburg High School, has a bachelor's of business from Radford, and a master's from James Madison. She has dedicated her life to the FFA, 4-H, Girl Scouts, athletics like softball and basketball, and the Strasburg Rotary Club. She has 14 years as an administrator with Lord Fairfax Community College and is a promoter of our community's history and traditions. Ms. Bowes?
Good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me okay? All right. So I have been mayor here in town for a little over a year. I guess it's a year and 3 months. I'm not counting, I promise. But one question I often get is, how's it going? And I think people are surprised when I say I'm really enjoying it. And so here's one of those moments where I look out and say, this is why I'm really enjoying it. Because not that I'm surprised that there's this many people here. I expect it at this point. I just think every time we pull the community together for a special recognition, an event like this, you show up. And it's amazing. We have an amazing community, and it wouldn't be possible without the movers and the shakers, the idea makers like Cheryl, who sees something out there and then just has to go after it. There's a of our museums, one of those. Everybody sitting up here is one of those. So that's just, we're so lucky to live in an area that's full of people like all of you that show up, that care about our history, that know the importance of preserving it. And I can't wait to dive deeper into the stories of these three ladies. And I feel that it's really timely because of the Women's March yesterday, just to say, go women, in honor of these three women. I mean, I think I read where Bertha was just put in a cardboard box with no marker on her gravestone. Yeah, and so now we're at a point where it's never too late, right? To unveil that, learn about her, learn about Emma, learn about Maria, and really honor these amazing talents and how strong they had to be to do what they did at that time, and to pursue their passion and the arts and to get that out there worldwide. So I can't wait to uncover more growing up here in the Shenandoah Valley, right off of Back Road, right down the road from Fisher's Hill. I'm hoping I find some connection with my family and these amazing women. And just appreciate all of you being here. Thank you for all that you do. Thank you, Cheryl. Thank you to Hope and your persistence. You're one of those strong women that get it done, right? And we are so lucky to have all of you. And a special thank you to Gloria. Our community is better off because of all of her work. We have an amazing museum because of her efforts. And thank you, Judge Hupp, for leading us now in the museum efforts. We appreciate appreciate all of you. So thank you.
Thank you, Brandy. Supervisor Tim Taylor sends his regrets that he could not make it and join us this morning. However, he did have a few words that he wanted to express. He's also on the board of directors for the Strasbourg Museum. He is very proud of the work our team has done, and he wants us all to know that history is never dead because there are so many stories that have yet to be discovered. These are strong women that made a difference, and it is rewarding to see their stories being told. Thank you, Tim. And Supervisor Dennis Morris, the supervisor for the area in which these ladies lived. He has 40 years of service as a supervisor with District 5. Did you know him?
Barely.
He is the chairman of the Northern Shenandoah Valley Regional Commission, and of course on the board of directors for the Friends of the North Fork of the Shenandoah River and the Shenandoah Alliance Shelter. He represents the areas in which the ladies' studio was in Fisher's Hill. Dennis Morris?
Thank you.
Good afternoon. I was quite humbled that I got a call from Hope inviting me to attend, and then I got a very nice welcome in the mail. And Hope, I appreciate what you and the committee has done. But before I go too far, did you all know that Hope was a first-class basketball player? You know, she played basketball like she got this event together. She thought about it laying in bed one night, and then the next morning she did something about it. So Hope, thank you for your leadership, and thank you for the committee, what they've done.
I've seen that picture the other day.
I did. That reminded me. My Hope went to school with my sister, so we have some connections there. But anyway, before I get started, I'd like to recognize Ralph Stickley, Gloria's husband. Ralph, thank you for sharing that wonderful wife of yours with our community. Thank you. And thank you for being here. Shenandoah County is blessed with history. Last Saturday night, I had the opportunity to attend the 25th anniversary of the Shenandoah Valley Battlefield Foundation in Winchester. And I'm always amazed at the history and the amount of work that goes into events like this. Each one of you all have a part in this recognition because you're here today. The committee did the legwork. You're here being very supportive. As leaders in our community, and I'm serious as I can be, we need to recognize these kind of individuals. And we're doing that today. But this is only the first step. We need to preserve this day in history. We need to build on this. It's like having a plan, you know, you put it together and you work a year or two on it and you put it in the library or put it on a shelf and it draws dust. We don't want to do that. We want to build from this day on. And then the third step is we need to promote this. We need to keep history Shenandoah County will be representing its 250th birthday. We need to incorporate today's events in that. They're going to be looking for committees, organizations to promote and to advertise what they've done. And I would encourage you, Hope, to get involved in that and have this recognition to move on and work with Zach Holler, who's chairman of this in the community, in the county, and we have community members, but we need to build on this today. So, you know, again, it's an honor to represent District 5. Fisher's Hill is rich in history, but it's not just Fisher's Hill, it's throughout Shenandoah County and the Valley. So thank you for your volunteerism. The volunteerism, you know, keeps this community alive. People come in here and say, they cannot believe the amount of love, concern, and community commitment that they see in Shenandoah County. So it's because of you all we have that reputation. So again, thank you all for your commitment. Thank you all for what you've done. And believe me, we're going to continue to preserve and promote this day. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dennis. And with the Virginia Department of Historic Resources is Mr. David Edwards. David Edwards is the director of the Virginia Department of Historic Resources Community Services Division. He's the director of the Northern Region Preservation Office. And David Edwards?
Thank you very much for inviting me to be here today, Hope and Cheryl and the other ladies of the committee, and for the mayor and Mr. Morris for your comments today. It's nice to follow someone who is promoting history, as I do for a living with the Department of Historic Resources, which is the state's Historic Preservation Office. I'm in the regional office in Stevens City, and we serve most of the Shenandoah Valley and Northern Virginia with the community's historic preservation needs. We carry on the National Register of Historic Places nominations every month. Strasburg Historic District, for instance, is listed on the National Register of Historic Places. We also help owners of historic properties with tax credits for rehabilitating the buildings. We provide technical assistance to anyone who has preservation needs in restoring old buildings and recognizing historical sites. But one of our most popular programs is our Highway Marker Program, which has been around even preceding the Department of Historic Resources. It was founded by the state in 1927. And since then, there have been 2,600 of these markers set along or erected along Virginia's highways to educate the public about Virginia history, whether it's archaeological site or a famous building or a famous event that occurred here, or most prominently about the people of Virginia who are important. In the beginning of our Highway Marker Program, we erected markers that were associated with our most historical figures in the Revolutionary War, the Civil War, our Virginia presidents and statesmen and their homes. But in the last 2 decades, we've been focusing more and more on erecting markers that represent underrepresented and minority communities in Virginia, including African American, Native American, and women's history. So I'm proud to be here today to help unveil this marker for 3 women who have probably until today been forgotten by most of us in history, but it is a special honor for us to educate the public about these 3 women, 2 painters and a writer that add to our better understanding of Virginia history through women's history. So thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, David. So we have some special guests here with us today. We have the Strasburg High School Triumph Music Honor Society. They're going to be playing a little bit of music for us for a few moments that are nature-related themes, honoring the 3 ladies. Thank you, Strasburg High School Triumph Music Honor Society and their director, Kylene Robinson. Our next speaker, our keynote speaker, Chris Volpe, comes all the way to us from New Hampshire. He is an artist, writer, and teacher. His work is shown nationally and held at Smith College, Whistler House Museum, and in numerous private collections. And in November, you have a showing at Boston's Kingston Gallery. His grants and awards include the St. Botolph Club Foundation, the Massachusetts Museum of Contemporary Art, Assets for Artists, and the New Hampshire State Council on the Arts. He has degrees from the University of New Hampshire and Stony Brook University. He has taught painting, literature, and mythology, and the history of art at various colleges and universities. He is a preeminent expert on the art and style of Maria Beckett. Christopher Volpe.
Thank you. I'm gonna have to raise this up a bit. All right, can you hear me all okay? Yeah, good. So, this is a wonderful event, and I really wanted to be here. So I drove down from New Hampshire. There were other things I did on the way, but this is so cool. I haven't worn this outfit in maybe 12 dozen years or so. It's my art history outfit. I've got the tweed going on and the tie and everything. So there was a time I wanted to be an art historian. And it's about that time that I ran into the work of Maria Beckett through a friend. And I'll talk about that. I'm not an expert on Bertha von Hillern or on the writer Emmma, right? But I do. I've done some research on Maria, so I did for Maria what I hope somebody might do for me someday when I'm completely forgotten, that cause I'm just an artist trying to survive. But the question is, you heard several times. So these women were forgotten, and the question is, well, why were they forgotten? Well, the obvious answer is they were women in a powerful men's world. But it's not the only answer. There are women artists who are remembered, and I think part of the answer why they weren't remembered has to do with the unusual circumstances of their lives here. It was very, very unusual for a painter, or especially a group of painters, to move out to the country, and especially for Maria Beckett, who was in mid-career at that point. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself, so I'm going to take this off if you don't mind. Because like I said, I'm not really an art historian. I just played one for a while. Here you go. Oh, thanks. So I am an artist. And so I have an artist appreciation especially for Maria. So here's how it happened. I was teaching. I haven't taught since then, except for teaching classes in painting now. So back then, I was believing that I was going to have an academic career, and so I was working hard to make that happen. And living in New Hampshire, we have the Wight Mountains there, and the Wight Mountains played a significant role in the development of American landscape painting. They were one of these sort of wild wilderness sites that artists visited and painted. And so I had a friend who ran a gallery in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and he showed many of these White Mountain artists, and he had a couple paintings by an unknown Maine artist named Maria Beckett. And no one knew when she was born. I think they knew when she died, but that was about it. And the paintings were extraordinary, especially one of them. There was one of the mountains, but there was another one that was a seascape that struck me as like incredibly modern. It was not a picturesque view like you might imagine, and like folks would have expected in the 19th century. It was an almost abstract painting, and I could see that the paint was applied with, not with brushes, but with a palette knife. And the painting itself was just kind of marvelous, had a kind of jewel-like quality to it, with all these little colors woven in, just sort of twinkling out from this very atmospheric, oceanscape. No ships, no clouds visible, semblance of waves, semblance of sky, and this beautiful sort of glowing mist of scintillating colors. And I was just really struck by it. I was like, what is that? He said, oh, that's by this woman, Maria Beckett. She painted the White Mountains. We don't know much about her. And I was like, that's fascinating, because it looked like a modern painting. It looked like it could have been painted yesterday. And again, she used a palette knife to do that, which is what the artists use to mix their paint. It's generally applied. Artists have always used palette knives to apply paint, but usually for tiny details or for particularly gnarly areas like rocks or some big clouds. Because what it does is you're actually picking up the paint with a knife and just smearing it on there. So it's not like you're carefully brushing anything. And carefully brushing was the predominant style in painting for hundreds and hundreds of years. Today things are different. But Maria was well ahead of her time by creating whole paintings just using the knife, very rapidly, very freely, and at the time it was probably pretty radical, pretty modern. So I became interested in this woman, and my friend introduced me to another art collector who knew a little bit more about her, and so I went down the rabbit hole trying to figure out who this woman was. And I spent several years doing all kinds of cool stuff. Like I was definitely rehearsing for being an art historian. I was going to I went to Washington D.C. and went to the archives, American art, and uncovered letters in which Maria Beckett was describing herself and her work. I found the timeline, talked to Maine history to find out when she was born. I took a plane to quick $99 two-way flight to Florida, because she was installed in she was an artist in residence at a very fancy hotel in Florida in the 1890s. So a shape of her life began to emerge from old newspaper clippings and very few mentions in catalogs, but there were, once in a while I'd find an old 19th century book of art history that would mention her, and they were always glowing terms. I'm sure Cheryl found this too about Bertha von Hillern. These women were not obscure in their day. Maria was almost like a rock star. She was constantly in headlines. She was gossiped about. Legends grew up around her, including that she used to ride her father's horses bareback out west, which is hard to imagine since he was a druggist in Portland, Maine. But she also apparently was she would shoot rapids in a canoe and literally shoot guns. She was a great shot, apparently. So interesting. All these pieces of color would come up. But where I think she really is really extraordinary and important is, again, her unusual, unique approach to painting. In 1866, there was a massive fire in Portland, Maine, and this number sounds crazy, but I think it's true. 10,000 of the city's 13,000 residents were left homeless. It's that crazy, that devastating a fire. It's the worst fire in American history at that time. And Maria's father didn't die in the fire, but he died a few months afterwards, due to what they put down as paralytic shock, which kind of just sounds like he kind of just gave up on life after that. He lost everything. They all did. So Maria, as she described it, immediately removed to Boston and immersed herself in art, which she has pursued passionately ever since. She got into a school for women in the 1870s with a very forward-thinking teacher, William Morris Hunt. And this is at landscape at this time in America was mostly about grand vistas of God's country, you know, and about predestination and a very celebratory magnificence that people felt about America was reflected in the art. So what Hunt discovered when he went to Europe is that they had a completely, almost polar opposite approach to landscape painting going on. It was called the Barbizon School. It was a bunch of artists from Paris who took off into the country, into a little town like this, around a whole bunch of forests called Fontainebleau, and a little town called Barbizon where they lived. So they became known as the Barbizon School eventually. But they were just like young rebels who just said, forget this, you know, forget art, what they were doing in Paris, we're going to do our own thing. So they invented a new style that was very plain spoken, very straightforward, very immediate and free, as opposed to the long studied, careful studio work of most painters. They went out into nature and did finished paintings there, and that was new. That had never been done before. Artists had gone into nature, but they only did sketches. Go back into the studio, build the sketches into these big elaborate theatrical pieces, but to just exhibit the sketch as a finished painting was not done. It was radical. Today, it's you know, it's huge. People, there's a great plein air movement going on, and most people paint a little bit like Maria Beckett. They use palette knives. They're quickly going to shoot from the hip. They're trying to get an impression down really fast, and that is the result of this French school called Barbizon, which gave way to Impressionism not long after. And the Impressionists were very familiar with, not so much the Barbizon painters in this country, but Maria studied with the leading Barbizon, one of the leading Barbizon painters. But actually the father, he was kind of outside everything. He was kind of a grandfather to both Impressionism and Barbizon. And it was very unusual for him to take students at all. But she was persistent. She wouldn't go away. And she got to actually live in the house that he had with his family. So she like moved in, basically camped on his doorstep, I guess, till he took her in and taught her his style. And Hunt died a year later. That was her first teacher. And Daubigny, this man, died a year later as well. She came back to the United States. So this is like 1880. Instead of setting up in Boston, which was a center of art, or New York, she came to Strasbourg, Virginia. I think it's because she wanted to replicate what she saw in France. I think she was trying to create a miniature Barbizon here in America. I think that's why she gathered these people around her. And like I said, the Barbizon and Impressionist schools changed history in a huge way. It changed the history of art. It basically gave way to abstraction and modern art. That's kind of what happened. But so you could say that Maria was very ahead of her time, but she was also her time did come around in the 1890s or so, but it was a very short-lived time because shortly after the turn of the century, European modernism, 1913, there was an armory show, it was called in New York City, came and swept away landscape painting, banished to the bin of history. It was all about abstraction and the fracturing of the painting surface and not painting things that looked like the things, but painting ideas about things, and hence modern. I think when I say modern is modern art, you have an image maybe of Picasso and others, and that's exactly what happened. So Maria was ahead of her time in the 1880s. She was here painting these paintings from nature using a French style, which was not popular in the United States. People looked down on it. They thought it was unfinished and shabby, you know, whatever. Just like anybody could do that. That's not talent, that type of thing. Just the way we look down on certain artists now, or the way we look down on abstract expressionists for a few decades before now they're revered. It was that way too. So the amount of success that Maria had, and by the way, she met Bertha in that class with Hunt, I think, and I suppose it's because of and Cheryl needs to look into this more, but it must be because of a connection that Bertha had with Strasbourg through her German heritage. It made them choose here, right? No? Why did they choose here? Yeah, we don't know. Why here? It's interesting, but they did. They walked the 9 miles to the, or 11 miles to the post office to to get their mail. And walk back. They'd bring their paintings down and probably in carts or something to the train, and they'd ship them off to places like New York and Chicago. And she had Maria had great success in New York. She was among the leading avant-garde painters in New York at the time, the 1880s, I guess. By the 1890s, she had left this area, and she took a permanent studio in New York City. That's sort of really the big studio building at the time. Literally hundreds of artists had this 59th Street studio that was buzzing with energy and activity and excitement also about the French style. So Impressionism, 1874. Maria had already been to France and back. America started to see more and more Impressionist paintings coming in, and they became all the rage. Even in New York City at this time, 1890s, all the galleries up and down Fifth Avenue were selling Impressionist and Barbizon paintings, mostly Barbizon, not quite Impressionist. It took a little bit longer. Remember, this is old times. So, but Barbizon. But they were mostly, almost all of them, painted by Europeans. And there were none of them painted by women. I don't think there was a single woman Barbizon painter that I can think of, unless you count Rosa Bonheur, but she didn't paint at all like the Barbizon painters. So it was very, very. It took a lot of courage and guts to do what she did, and to be as successful as she was. It was kind of extraordinary. So here's an account. I thought you might like to hear this. This is an account from a newspaper about the two women, the two painters. And where do you think these two strange, gifted creatures have spent some 10 years of their precious lives? Wrote this reporter. Down in the wilderness of Virginia, where they built a small hut in the midst of the solitude of the art-inspiring region. Here they carried their small belongings, turning their backs upon the great busy world, and settled down to commune with nature and paint her likeness undisturbed. And here's another quote. This one is from the New York World, 1885, and I think they get a little carried away. But here you go. Beckett counts among her friends the most eminent French and American artists of the generation. She has traveled, lived in France and Italy, and studied art there before she entered the famous studio of William Hunt in Boston. I think it must have been after, but anyway. There she met Miss von Hillern and discovered in her a congenial soul. Since then, the ladies have lived and worked together, spending their winters in New York and Boston, in which latter city, they hold a sort of aristocratic salon weekly. So they were in the Hotel Vendôme, which was the first electric light hotel in Boston, and it was total luxury. I mean, they were not obscure people, obscure women. They had people coming to visit them. They would set up their work, I think probably in the lobby of the hotel, and the elite of Boston would come in. And apparently Maria was an unbelievable conversationist. She was just full of wit and intelligence and passion, and so. She would sweet talk them into buying her art, I guess. Nice work, yeah. So here's this goes on. In which latter city they hold a sort of aristocratic salon weekly, and their summers in a studio among the forests of Virginia. Their studio at Strasbourg is one of the wonders of the Old Dominion. Miss Beckett, like Miss von Hillern, is a landscape painter with a fine feeling for the poetry of nature and a leaning toward the grave and quiet color common to all pupils of the great Boston master, that would be Hunt. The sobriety of her art is by no means reflected in her social qualities, for she is one of the most brilliant and widely instructed conversationalists in the Western continent. So if you could get an audience with Maria, man, you had it made. Right? So I think it's fantastic that you have found the location of this cabin in the wilderness of Virginia. It's fabulous. So the question that always was in the back of my mind when I was learning and writing about Maria Beckett, I published a lengthy biographical appreciation, I think you'd say, in Maine History Journal. And if you're interested in learning more about Maria, it's online. Just search for Maria Beckett and my name, Volpe, Chris Volpe, and you'll find it. It's on a site called academia.edu, and it's a lot of color in there that obviously I can't give you now, but I tried to make it an interesting read instead of one that's dry. But where was I going with that? Forgot. Oh, the question that was always in the back of my mind was, like, why was she forgotten? She's obviously an innovative painter. She won awards and had shows at all the major exhibition places of the time. In fact, she was said as a way of, I think, trying to get street cred. She said that she studied with a painter called Homer Dodge Martin, who painted in the White Mountains. And Homer Dodge Martin was really fairly popular during the day anyway. He had a lot of friends, let's say. He had a lot of connections. I think she probably was trying to get a connection, help with her career with him, and nothing happened for her. He did nothing for her career. But when Homer Dodge Martin died, his friends took a collection up and bought several of his paintings and donated them to the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And they're still there, and he's noted in art history. He's known. Well, in 1911, when Maria Beckett died, she got an obituary in the New York Times, and not a small one, a nice obituary that recounted her exploits and her colorful career and her success. Homer Dodge Martin died without notice. No one paid attention. So that tells you a little bit about what, the telescoping that's happened here, what it was like then and what it's like now. So why is that? Why did that happen? It's partly because she didn't have that network. Bertha von Hillern, barely speak English, you got here. She didn't have an old boy network here the way a lot of the painters in Boston did, like Hunt. He was part of the Boston Brahmin scene, so of course he could afford to go to Europe and discover a whole new kind of painting. At any rate, so when she died in 1911, all of her work went to her brother, I think, who donated them to. It's a question. We're still working out what happened to those 225 paintings that Cheryl mentioned, but we know that a bunch of them were auctioned off shortly after. And her brother was a writer for the Catholic Church. He was if there was such a job then. But anyway, but he died just 2 years later from sadly a freak accident from a faulty gas heater in his room. He was suffocated in his sleep. Maria died of heart failure at 65, I think. So that was it. Because of the fire, which wiped out their homestead and pretty much killed her father, she had no heirs. And she was such an independent spirit, such a fierce, go at it spirit, that she didn't bother to suck up to anybody. She didn't bother to create, the who you know kind of connections that would have preserved her legacy. So it's up to us. It's up to us. It's up to you, and it's up to people like Cheryl who follow a thread and start pulling on it and see what comes. And I do believe that all of our actions have unforeseen and sometimes far-reaching consequences. You know, I couldn't have imagined that this would be happening when I wrote that, when I first started learning about this woman that nobody knew. So I love it that, you know, 10 years later, since I wrote that article, now this. So things are accumulating. It's another pull on the thread. It's another load of data. Another taste of what else is out there. Someone needs to do for Bertha von Hillern what I did for Maria, and I think that's what's happening. Sounds like someone's been bitten by the bug and are now chasing down these paintings that are scattered everywhere and nowhere. I bet you that Cheryl and I were talking about more of Maria's paintings will probably start turning up in your town at some point than have so far, because she was very prolific. She painted fast, and apparently they were in the habit of giving away paintings as thanks for various things. So quite possible that more paintings will come to light. I just wanted to, I think I'll just close with a quote from a painter who I admire, which sort of speaks to this carrying of the torch that we're all doing here today, and how we all play a part and can play a part in history, whether we realize it or not. This is Enrique Celaya. He's a painter in Los Angeles, and from Cuba, I think. And he uses the word prophet sometimes to speak of artists, because artists are prophets, because what they do has forward implications for the future, whether they see them or not. So he says, "There's a tendency for us to think that to be a prophet, or to do anything grand, you have to have a special gift, be somehow called for. And I think ultimately what really matters is the resolve to want to do it, to give your life to that which you consider important. And if you have no skills to offer, nothing special to offer, it's all the more amazing that you do it, the more remarkable. And I think that resolve is all that really matters." And in the specific case of art, I think the notion that to bring the future forward by throwing yourself desperately, and I think desperation is part of what I consider a prophet to have. Once you've made that resolve to launch yourself forward, like Maria did, and like we are, then desperation is the only factor. Urgency, desperation. There's no way to calculate. And the reason I made the distinction between minor prophet and major prophet is because I'm not trying to put any capital letters here or trying to say that you're going to be remembered for this or that, because in the end, it doesn't really matter. It's a private journey that no one really needs to know about. And one more quote from Brainerd Corey, who's an artist as well, on the invisible traces that we leave. "Our traces do not need to be grand. Sometimes the tiniest gesture will ring through the ages, long after the biggest are forgotten." Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris.
I have a job to do.
And now I'd like to present y'all with the unveiling of the marker that is currently located at Fisher's Hill.
Who's got a piece?
Thank you. And to wrap us up, one of our researchers and our great coordinator, Hope Brim.
First of all, Dennis, can you hear me? You cannot hear me. Can you hear me? Okay. Dennis, I'm going on record as I know a lot of nice people who would be good at the history of the 225th, was it?
250.
250 of Shenandoah County. See, I'm behind, so I'm not a very good historian. So I'll give you some names.
Okay, I appreciate that.
And also, I see everyone out there taking in the weather, not so well, I think. And we'll go on record that Brandy had nothing to do with this pavilion. That was before her time, right?
Correct.
Okay, what a glorious day we've had here. The weather, the participants, especially thank you to Chris for you who have attended. It wasn't the music great, and it's going to continue here in a minute. And I think, Colleen, wasn't the first song something about the wind? I thought you said one of the numbers was about wind. Wind, and we had some effects of it up here. Okay. We thank the Strasburg Historical Association for being our greeters today. Thanks to Molly, Neil's wife, for being our videographer, I think that's what you call it, and Michael for being a photographer. I've been asked to thank people, and you know, when you thank people, you don't want to leave anybody out. So I thank all of you. I thank everyone who didn't come, but was here in spirit. But I do have some specifics, and I will get to. When Cheryl told Gloria and I about these famous people in Fisher's Hill, of course I grew up in Fisher's Hill, and so it's like, I don't know. But it really came real to me when Ann Foster, who is the owner of the Barb House, allowed us to come visit on several occasions. She was very gracious. Her son Michael also was a host one time, and it came real to me that, okay, these people did exist, and it was probably the spark that said, yes, we need to find their story. We thank all the people that we've contacted through historical groups, museums, art galleries, private collectors, Museum of Shenandoah Valley, the archives at the Shenandoah County Library. We appreciate the publicity we've gotten from the Northern Virginia Daily. Josette could not be here today, but we also have Linda Wheeler over here from I still call it the Bryce Courier, but I think it's called the Mountain Courier.
Covers the wilderness area.
Yeah, covers the wilderness area. You know, and everybody we contacted, that they had something to share, they were more than gracious with it. But even if they didn't have anything, I see Mary Beth out here, and Mary Beth and Chris Sherman, who they both retired from Shenandoah County government. We found that there were 3 paintings at one time, I think it was 1972, were in the Shenandoah County Courthouse. We looked high and low. Dennis probably was even asked to look for them, I don't know. But I remember Chris saying, I wish I could find them. I wish I could find them, and we wish he could have too. But people tried, and that's what it was all about. We like to thank the Department of Historic Resources, David and Jennifer Locks, who's in the Richmond office, and VDOT for erecting the sign there in Fisher's Hill, and it is up. We'd like to thank the Strasburg Historical Society Association again, and the Strasburg Museum, who paid largely for the forging of the marker. Today's activities were coordinated through the town office, and especially to Olivia Hilton and Amy Keller, who is actually a Fisher's Hill resident, but they're both out of town today. Marquita, I don't see Marquita Mitchell here, but she also advised us on how to plan and execute such a program, since she had already done it. Just a couple announcements. Hopefully you signed the guest book. If you would like to see the book when it comes out, no obligation. There's a paper there to sign with your name and contact information. And the bookmark. Take as many of these as you want. Maybe you go to auctions, or maybe you go to antique or consignment stores. Also, maybe your great grandfather has one hanging on the wall, okay? Or maybe somewhere in a closet. We still would like to find these. We couldn't find 225, but maybe we can find at least 5 here in the valley. Neil keeps our website up to date, and he probably will be putting, I believe, pictures in the video, maybe possibly on that.
Yes.
Yes, okay, you moved on me. Okay. And also the Strasbourg Heritage Association has a newsletter here today if you're interested in it. And they will be adding a ghost story in their activity they do at the end of the month, including our 3 women. It will be told at, I think, what was the theater, and is now a Hispanic church there across from the post office. Thank you, Colleen. I hope I'm saying it correctly. Colleen, you know, people say our youth are our future, and lots of times they don't get a lot of praise. We hear a lot of criticism on the other youth, but these are a look at our future, and they're very talented, and I can see a lot of respect for you as the director, and appreciate you coming. One last thing. Marty, I see Marty out there, and Marty's helped me get in contact with the Fry Rinker Memorial people. If you know anything about these ladies, 2 of them, one's buried at what I call the paupers, but they call it something else, at Mount Hebron in Winchester, unmarked grave. Bertha is buried at Western State Cemetery. Grave is marked, and we're still trying to find the location of Maria Beckett. We hope to, in the future, give them the recognition they were given today, but also give it to them in a proper foot marker, or whatever you call it. Last, Fisher's Hill residents, I see some past and present there, and appreciate everyone coming out. And would we please wait as the music group finishes the program for us?
you, and this concludes our program. And definitely make sure you go check out the marker at Fisher's Hill.